Hi, everyone. Welcome to the presentation today for your CD Saturday or Sunday on climate change and food systems in Canada. My name is Amanda Smith, and I'll be kind of guiding you through this whole presentation, which should be about 45 minutes. And yes, so our first screen, as you kind of see, that since it's about climate change and we're within Canada, this is actually some flooding happening actually in Neepawa in Manitoba, and it's very representative. And I think that a lot of us across Canada has seen certain sites such as this. It's a very it's a landscape that we're all kind of used to seeing. And yeah, so I figured I'd start out with this because it is about climate change, and we'll kind of go from there. So that's our first introductory screen, and I am filming and I am recording this live, and I am within Langley, BC, and that's where I currently work, and I do live in Abbotsford. So I'll just go to my next screen. So in regards to climate change, it's a pretty complex topic, and there's a lot of opinions on it. And this presentation won't be so much about the science of climate change. It's going to be a little bit more about how we're going to be adapting. So climate change is something that we're all very concerned about. It makes our front page news quite often. It is on our radios as we drive to work, or when we're listening at home. And it's pretty broad. Everybody's idea of climate change is across the board, and it's very vast. And this one, because we're speaking really about CD Saturdays and Sundays and food, it will be explained a little bit more in that sort of context. So I'm going to save some of the science behind climate change for some links that will be within below in the YouTube description for this. And I'll make sure that Seeds of Diversity gets all of those links. So that's one thing about climate change. And then we have local food systems. So I'm breaking this down a little bit because it's quite a meat and potatoes topic. When we think about some of the topics we think about our gardening, this is one that we do need to keep in mind, although it can be quite heavy. So that's why I'm going to simplify it and break it down a little bit. Now, when it comes to food systems, it can be explained in so many different ways. It can be just basic understanding about how our food is coming to the table, how it's coming into community kitchens, gleaning projects, or simply the basic principle of getting food to the basic population that we have here in Canada. But food systems can be also looked at a federal level, and then that's typically done by commodity crops. So that would be the dairy industry, the wheat board. We have all of our berry commodity groups as well across Canada. So we think about that at the federal level. And then we can be provincially guided within our own crops, within what we can grow within our growing zones. And then we break it down even further to municipally. So that would be our city levels. And so where we're kind of sitting at as gardeners would be at the municipal level. And that's where we're going to be talking about and how to be more local and sustainable. Because when we think about food security and food systems, regarding climate change, we want to make sure that we're still supporting our local businesses and farmers. And in addition, we're able to grow our own food. And that's where a closer look at climate change and how that's affecting us already, and potentially some kind of avenues of where we could go will be kind of discussed through this period. So in regards to my background, some people are probably already kind of wondering about it. Like, what is this lady doing from BC talking about climate change and food systems? I do have a little bit of experience in growing food. And currently right now, I work for a non-for-profit organization called the Langley Environmental Partner Society, which is in the Fraser Valley, actually located in Langley, as I had mentioned before. And for them, I'm actually their agricultural stewardship coordinator. So during COVID and before COVID, I was educating youth and adults on gardening and food systems through our local school district. And I also manage a teaching farm for public education and information. In addition to that, there are some grants that we have received in terms of food security, and that would be essentially teaching people actually how to get through COVID and other kind of initiatives like that. So that's primarily what I do, but that's what I do now. But previous to that, I also was a landscaper and a gardener for a botanical garden for 4 years. It was a 6-acre, we would call it botanical garden. It was an English style perennial garden, but it also had community garden plots. I also, during that time, worked for a fruit tree arborist. So that was actually a really great experience as well. I'm one of the master gardeners here in BC. And for about 6 years, I was actually farming 4 different testing sites when it comes to soil, and essentially having a farm business to which I was selling vegetables. And my first site, which is really, that was probably the most rewarding experience growing food, is I had no irrigation and it was full of heavy clay soil. So we did the whole pitchfork and the carrots, absolutely. My second site was wonderful. It was complete opposite to that. It had full irrigation, underlying irrigation water pipes and hoses everywhere. I had boom sprayers. It had fantastic loamy soil, rich in organic matter. That was one site. And then I switched to a place that was shady and sandy. So it's been quite an interesting experience. So when I refer to that teaching farm for public information and education, I'm now on a floodplain and I have no irrigation. So this is kind of where I'm going with. So when I say my Mother Nature background, it's pretty important and it's pretty key as well. It kind of adds to some of these struggles that a lot of us, have when we're growing our own plants. So it's been actually a rewarding, I would say, coupled with all of these experiences, a really rewarding 10 years, but it's been very educational and informative. And I do have, with a little asterisk down at the bottom, that because when you are a plant lover and you love plants and gardening, no matter how busy you are, you still try to find some time. And for fun, I'm completing my flower design certification this spring. So believe it or not, when we come to growing food and being in a field like this, yep, flowers. So climate change, we have a bit of a little review. So the climate is essentially what we refer to climate. That would be prevailing weather conditions. So what is the weather right now? What is our environment? And when we think about that during climate change, it's essentially the gradual warming of our global climate. So this slide and the next 2 slides are going to be dealing mostly with the global aspect of it. So when you're thinking about your own environment, just think about what we're talking about right now, which is global, because we're going to be breaking it down a little bit more throughout the presentation. So we think extreme weather events. So it could be extreme hot, really cold. We could have excessive rains and very dry conditions like drought. And sometimes we may be experiencing through this whole up and down is a few degrees higher temperature or few degrees lower, and that would be on shoulder seasons. So I'm sure everybody kind of knows when I reference shoulder seasons, that would be sort of the springtime, the not quite growing season time, and then we have kind of the after into fall kind of time frame. So the next slide is probably only scientific graph I'm going to give you, just because there's a lot more to talk about outside of a lot of the science behind it, but it's very important to keep into some of the history of where we've stemmed from over time. This is a simple graph about temperature anomaly. And then we have here the base bottom by year. So when we take a look at what the baseline would be of course the 0 that you see right here. That would be kind of where we would say normal. So temperature abnormality, we think baseline being 0. And then when we go up or down from that baseline, that's when we start to track about where we think about our temperature is. And this is again, globally. So no matter where we are, when we start out into 1880, I'm really grateful that people were actually documenting a lot of this stuff in terms of temperature, because quite frankly, they would have had to. They had to grow food and had to eat too. So we can see that there are dips, which are going to be kind of notated by those little gray circles there. And it goes along this baseline, which is this black mark, and it follows along the zero. So when we think about going kind of south from that zero mark of that baseline on this side, we are hitting a little bit cooler. Okay. And then what happens is, yeah, we get a little bit higher when we get into 1940 as an average. This is for the whole year. So are we overall a little bit cooler or overall a little bit warmer? And then we are starting to actually increase as we go. And when we think about where we are, this does cut off by where 2020 is. It's quite high. So this is showing actually the upswing we're having in our global temperature, which is becoming warmer. So we think about all of that. If globally we're getting warmer, we're going to have impacts on our environment. That's going to be normal. So again, we're still thinking about the whole overall where we sit globally. So we do overall have a sea level rise. We do have, and it's very much dictated and notated in a lot of the news articles that our ice caps are slowly starting to melt. We are getting a little bit more acidic nature in our ocean. And there are some current conflicting claims on resources. I can again share links to that, and that will be below in the YouTube description. But now when we talk about that, that's all globally. What about us here in Canada? We are kind of wondering about that and where we're going to end up going. So we do have heat waves. I'm pretty sure anybody who's watching this will kind of think about, wow, it was really warm. It was really, really warm. It's a really hot day. I haven't experienced anything like this before. That's going to be something that everybody has in common. And then we think about air quality issues. So we've kind of heard quite a bit in the news about increased forest fires that would be within, northern British Columbia, some areas of the Okanagan, and then we have, of course, in a little bit north and south in Ontario and in Quebec. That's just what happens. We're going to have forest fires, and that impacts our air quality. Also, we have flooding and drought. We already noticed that on the first one, but we have evidence by that first screen where it was in Neepawa. We have a little bit of flooding there, which is something that we do kind of see common in across the way. But flooding and drought is going to happen. So number one, let's say, for example, to which I did see, and I should share with you that I actually did live in Manitoba for 5 years, and I actually came first in the month of April, and it was flooding for days, like it, as far as you could see. Now, that's something that actually is quite normal for that area and then some areas of Saskatchewan, but there is quite a bit of flooding in some areas that aren't really used to having it. And I can speak for at least British Columbia and in some areas of the East Coast that's what we're seeing now in some of our cities and towns. The fact that I'm actually growing now for my 4th testing site on a floodplain, this is going to be actually quite interesting to see like how often, or will I even have to water my garlic? That it'll be one thing, because it's going to be quite deep, and therefore the groundwater will be there. But drought is something else. So we might actually experience severe flooding in sometimes, and then we experience no rain at all in the growing season, and that's when we start to call it a drought. Or in some areas where the rain systems are within their own growing area, they experience no rain, therefore it's drought. So drought is taken in very many different time frames within the world, but that would be for us. We still have the same kind of growing season time frames, but that would be us not getting any rain. Now that has happened, and that's where we see water restrictions in municipalities. We see fines being given. That's where that starts to happen, because in some areas we're protecting our groundwater. And one that's very near and dear to my heart when we come to impacts on our environment is the very last point there, which is invasive plants and pests. So when we go through impacts on our environment, we're starting to see across Canada some very interesting new insects that have come to light. And I can tell you one now that you already are aware of is the brown membrated stink bug. That one is potentially, well, actually it is damaging to crops, especially fruit trees. And there are some other pests. So that was a little hitchhiker that came from China by way of the United States, and it's now with us. And it is, they love our environment. They love those nice little warm areas. Some populations are higher across Canada than others in this insect, but that's when we start to see more new ones, and how we could control the ones before using pests, pesticides. The Ministry of Environment has decided to ban a lot of our pesticides across Canada. So we're having to come up with different ways to control some of these things affecting our plants. Now, when we start to go through, climate change, and we have drought times and we have flooding times, that tends to actually also creep in more invasive plants. So we are definitely seeing more and more things as we kind of gone through the last couple of years, but that's kind of what it means for us in Canada. And again, when we go to the slide with the growing zones and we can see sort of where the temperatures lie, some of these issues are going to be different in some areas. So this doesn't go for every growing area, I just want to state, but we want to just be quite up on where we are. And so this is where we kind of come from now. So we're going to hover on this map here for quite a while, actually, because there's a lot of information that can be extracted from it. So this is from the Government of Canada website. It's their Natural Resources and Agricultural and Agri-Food Canada Plant Hardiness Zone. And if you haven't really looked at some of the growing zones across Canada, it's very interesting. So whoever is watching within your area where you are in Canada, you can just simply see where some of those colored areas are. So there tends to be dips. Let's say in BC, there's a bit of a dip here in the center where we have blue, and then it comes up and it's green, and then it dips down. And so it kind of creates a little bit of a wave across Canada. And typically, so if we kind of work from west to east, we're dealing with growing zone, areas, which would be about, I'd say, more about a 7. I mean, they do make some differentiations, as you see across the board when it comes to plant hardiness, between A and B on that particular number. And then just another thing too is that the plant hardiness number always goes within the previous winter, not the winter that you're on right now. So usually the plant hardiness tends to change a little bit later in the year, not in the first part, because they have to get all of the documents. So I would say this is probably the most up to date that we've got. So yeah, we're out in terms of east. Yes, I can tell you, and I will admit that this area of British Columbia is quite mild when it comes to the plant hardiness zone, and then it kind of can go up to the zone 6, 7, and then we get kind of these patterns that come up by waves, being kind of that zone, 3 to 4, and then we get into 2 and 1s. And again, we think about the equator and where that is, the more south we go in all of our provinces across Canada, when we get along to that border where our border lines are with the United States, that's where it's going to be the most mild. And we can see that across the nation. And also the thing is we can take a look at some of these areas and think, well, wow, these are some really great growing areas. To some degree it is. But if we think about like some of the pests and diseases, and I will say specifically pests, we seem to be having some higher population counts of that stink bug that I had mentioned before, out in this tropical area, just because it likes the conditions more. And we probably we have issues growing fruit trees in this area as well because of codling moth damage. Codling moth damage is across the nation, not to say that it's not, but because of this mild area, it's quite temperate, and pests really love to live there. And typically when it's that warm in the wintertime, our overwintering eggs don't die. This is sort of the problem. And so we're seeing across Canada our growing areas, and it actually is quite normal if we think about our seasonality in growing, let's say between the end of May and the first week of October. A lot of our provinces have that same thing in common across Canada. What happens here is that while this is just a growing zone and it refers to the previous winter, it will change. But to some degree, it is just a general number. And that's where you can tweak this a little bit. So let's say if you had a plant that was specifically noted to be for a zone 10, you can still cheat and find some ways to keep those plants alive in a zone 8 or a zone 7. And there have been some really great successes in overwintering plants that are a zone 8 or a zone 6 in, mid to northern Manitoba, but it's how you do it. And a lot of you guys are very experienced gardeners. I completely understand, but there is a way that you can cheat, but just keep in mind this plant hardiness zone when you're buying plants, because one thing about garden centers, and I've worked in a garden center before, is they like to bring in plants that people like, and sometimes it's difficult. So, but this is just that growing zone. There's a lot of other information that can be extracted out from this map, but that's kind of where I'm going to leave it right now. So I might go back to this in some slides if I need a reference, so just to let you. So our backyard gardens, we all love them. And this is an interesting slide because I'm not going to show a lot of the woes that we experience across Canada, because that wouldn't be making for a very nice presentation to you at all regarding climate change, but it's something that we need to be aware of. So there has been quite a few windstorms now across Canada, and with areas that have a lot of windbreaks, it becomes more damaging. And we're seeing some of that damage now starting from I want to say about 2014 until now. There's been quite a bit of damage, and there's been a lot more information on which trees to be putting along boulevards. There's been a lot of changes just because, let's say, the alder tree, they realize great growing trees, fantastic, but they also are skinny trunks and they snap in a windstorm. So this is to the photo that you see on the one side, all those green lush plants, there's quite a few beets growing there. There's potatoes in the back. There's some kale, and there's a butternut squash climbing on a fence. We have some great nasturtiums here. And also you can see the garlic in the front. And of course it's scaping, as you can kind of tell, those little curly things. Now that particular photo was taken in mid-July. The gardener, should have taken those scapes off already a little bit earlier, but he left them on. That's totally fine. But so this particular photo was taken in July, and now when we see the other side of the screen where there's a gardener, her name is Brenda, she's actually standing on a pathway. Believe it or not, she's standing on a pathway, and this green lush garden is actually behind her. and you can't quite see it because there's all those alder trees there. Now, this damage here of all of these trees coming down, which actually affected some fruit trees there, some of those alders were large enough that they snapped and actually hit some of the fruit trees. So that now has created this. And it took a team of, I think it was 5 people, 3 days to clean all of that up. Now, that particular damage and that windstorm happened 3 weeks after the photo was taken in July of this green lush garden. And so that was August. So we think about damage in August, and Brenda, you can see it's August and she's wearing a jacket. And so it's temperature dropped. There was a brand new system that came in. This photo is not brand new to people. You've seen it in your areas if you have experienced quite a bit of wind and damage. So it's fairly important to kind of, notate it. And some people, we always take photos of things that are pretty all the time, but we don't actually document to take things that are not the prettiest. But it was a great learning, and it's a little bit of history, because at least when you think about climate change and some of these really strange weather patterns that we're experiencing that affect our gardens and essentially our food, because some of those, that all that garlic probably did survive, and those potatoes, but I'm thinking that trellis where that butternut squash is growing on collapsed. And some of those kale branches actually probably broke. So that's something to kind of think about. Always think about what is happening at the time. And August, that day in August, people were very much aware of how strange that was, because we never anticipated wind like that in the late summer. So something to kind of keep in mind: climate change and very irregular patterns. So we're talking about our food systems, and we're thinking more at the municipal level. So that would be our backyard gardens and some of our small farms. We need to think about, in addition to that damage that can happen, what are the other effects on edible plants? So again, we've kind of already notated sudden weather changes, let's say wind, or dipping temperatures can actually damage plants, and it just sometimes it can create really delayed growth and dieback. So sometimes when we always hear about Chinooks in Alberta and in the Calgary area, but really, what does that do to some of the plants? If you have a Chinook, reverse wise, it starts to, if it's summertime and dips down because of some weather system coming in, you could potentially get, yes, dieback and delayed growth, because sometimes, and you can see by that romaine leaf there, that is actually an example of frost in the end of August as well. And this particular photo was taken in northern BC. So it was still like in August, so we still had some really warm times, but when lettuces, they like cool weather, we still had some frost damage, and that is what that is. So again, with that, you can get wilting, decomposition. So when you get, again, frost damage, you actually accelerate the plant decomposition. And again, we had mentioned before, breaking branches. Trellises, they totally snap. Vine plants come down. That could be, usually that tends to happen in the later season, and all of the harvests are nice, and they're nice and heavy on the plants. It doesn't take anything for any one of our strange weather systems to come in and break them down. And then we think about food and growing food in our gardens. These are all annual plants. Annual plants really only have a certain length of life, which is going to be mostly within that warm growing season. They're very tender. It can be the hardiest plant, but if you get freezing temperatures just randomly, then that's when these tender plants, they can't survive, even the toughest plant. So they just, when we have systems that kind of happen that way, they can't regrow. To some degree, yes, they can regrow if it's going to be happening in June or July, it has enough time. But we're seeing a lot of this damage happening more kind of in that August, September season, where we would see lengthening of our seasons because it's warmer. But that doesn't mean that we are, missing out on some of these other things. So the one thing I want you guys to all take away from this is we have to be able to adapt. Climate change is something that will probably be around for a while. We're going to still have, that you saw that temperature, that global temperature, our world will be becoming a little bit warmer. That's globally. We'll have pockets where that doesn't happen in the world, but we need to be able to track our own weather systems. So you can actually go to any of your local weather companies that you're in, and you can get kind of a backlog of and a history of where our weather has been and temperature. But it's something that if you're a gardener, I would really recommend that you do as well. Now, there is a photo of it's a 10-year garden book that I do have, and that is February 19th, and you can see that it has the year. You would write the year down, average high, average low, and any notes that you want to write in there. Because sometimes when you think about and you're planning your garden, you want to just quick reference and you want to see like what really happened last year, and make sure you include as much as you can. That can be like humidity levels. Humidity is something else that people typically don't think of very often. And so if you're getting increased warm summers, and very intense in terms of the UV rays, you could be getting a higher humidity rate as well. And that will happen more and more in milder areas. So along that kind of base of where the US and Canada border is. But make sure you keep notating about humidity levels, which you can get on your weather network in your area. But even just when it comes down to wind rates, like if you're tracking how much wind you're getting, it actually is quite amazing. And again, the key to adapting is thinking about what you want to grow. So more short season crops that can maybe handle a second seeding, that would be probably more ideal, because depending on where you are, there is a seed company that is very much followed, and it has a growing guide, and it hasn't changed the first frost date in 10 years. Your frosts will come in open areas where there isn't a lot of trees, and you're going to get first frost faster than someone who has been more shaded because they have trees and shrubs around them to protect. So that's where you kind of want to think about your seasons and what you're growing, but short season crops are really good. And also when I'm referring to trellises, with some of the damage that we have seen, there is nothing more sad than having your mortgage lifter tomato that is an indeterminate variety snap and come down and bruise that green fruit. That's one of the sad things, and I have seen it already in some of the areas as I've traveled kind of across Canada, is it can be quite sad when you see something that's very unexpected, and beans that are really nice and heavy, and they also come down. So you may want to start to think about some other varieties that require less staking, because the less, if you go a little bit lower, then you're going to be having maybe some more success because there won't be that same pickup in wind. So when I say plants that are bushy, that would be probably the determinant ones. There's some great plants out there in terms of tomatoes. And I know picking beans when you're bending is not really the nicest thing to do, but they're quite easy. There is a tomato that I actually really like, and it actually is fantastic run across Canada. Which kind of leads me to my next point here, is I do say choose seeds that are local to your region, because they tend to stand up more to your weather systems, and your growing temperatures as well. But there is a tomato called Manitoba, which is actually a fantastic tomato. It is obviously indigenous, really, and localized to the province of Manitoba, but it grows. If it can grow in Manitoba, it can grow anywhere. I will say it's a great, wonderful little tomato, and it's a shorter season tomato. It has really good stand up to blight, and it's a really good tomato. But that's the only thing I'm really going to mention in terms of varieties, is try to think about which ones would kind of suit you. I mean, everybody has these loves of certain things, but we may want to kind of expand our horizons a little bit more, um, and kind of think about where we want our gardens to be. But keeping note about some of the weather patterns is going to be really important if you want to, have success in your garden. Because if we don't adapt, it's going to be a little bit tricky. And also, what you want to do is plan and observe. So again, we're using locally saved seed, and if we have really delayed, let's say we can't get into our garden until the end of June. Sometimes that is just the natural case. Sometimes, even in BC, we can't get into our gardens till the end of May. That's just what is the case. If we have shorter seasons and we have earlier frost dates, because that is also happening, we want to make sure that we're doing more things from seedlings than we do from direct seed. Now, obviously, that would not go for your root crops, or your little mesclun mixes, but try to go seedlings as much as possible. There's been a lot of farmers that have been very successful doing beet starts and actually putting beets in the ground via seedlings. Yeah. Anyway, also, if we do have drought times, really look into possible water collection systems. No matter where you are, if you're by a gutter, you can actually get a pipe to go down into a cistern, because the one thing you don't want to do if we have drought, and I know that there are some gardeners across Canada, and even myself, I hardly ever water my garden at all in the summertime. And I do get quite a bit of plant stress. Sometimes the plants do survive because I've done via seedlings to have an established root system. Sometimes if you are caught in a drought and your municipality will not let you water anything, having a water collection system will be helpful. So the other thing about it is observing, is we want to actually have you look at your garden. So there's many people that have ideas about their gardens to get kind of excited, and they plant it and they tend to forget about it. This is not the time to do it. You may be positively surprised if you get quite a bit of rain, in the summertime. If you have quite kind of humid temperatures, you may have really great yields, maybe not high pollination, but yields in something else. But look at your garden, because if we're going to be having increased insects and bugs, they again really love humid, warm winters and can survive cold dips as long as it returns to a warmer temperature. Now, wherever you are, your local agricultural, section, or your office or whatnot, if you can capture a bug, you can bring it into their office and they will ID it for you. And then you know what you got if you don't know right off to see it. And if it's something that is kind of out of the ordinary, they will start to track it and ask for more people to send in specimens and locations. But there could be, depending on humidity levels and wet summers, we could be having, let's say, a higher aphid problem. So you just want to check your garden and look at it. If you've done it and you've invested that time and you've invested the money, go out and have a look at it and turn up the leaves, on the underside, and take a look to see maybe what's hiding there. Is there holes in your leaves? Is your plant not looking so great? And if it's not, take a little bit of a dive down and see if anybody is attacking that root system. It's just good to know what you've got and what you're dealing with at that time. Also, when it comes to soil, so thinking about planning and observing, you kind of want to plan for soils that will hold moisture. So when I had referred to some of the testing sites that it was clay, and then when it was sand and shade, those are areas that were very tricky. It was quite interesting trying to get some success out of it, especially being a farm business. But the fact that if you've got a soil that is rich in organic matter, it will hold water for longer. And so when you've got fantastic soil and you are doing things from seedling stage, or you're going in with very strong, vigorous plants, you're going to have greater success. So start them off right. Make sure you invest in your soil, take care of it, and treat it like it's like a pet, because it's something that will kind of give back and give back and give back to you. And also, what I want to say is, since we're going through all of this, things are changing. It's very interesting to see where our weather is going, especially during COVID, because we're outside more and more than we ever have been before, because we want to get fresh air because we don't want to be stuck inside. People are across Canada are getting more into their gardens because they can't have the same interaction with their friends and their family, and they're being distanced and safe. We are in the opportunity to actually right now learn about this whole thing. And we have new gardeners stepping in and trying to kind of figure out their way. And the last thing we want is to get them disappointed. We don't. So I say spread that word. If you have it, spread it. So try to work with local schools to plant gardens that work for the whole school year. Join garden clubs and talk with fellow gardeners. If you have a farmers institute in your area, try to engage with them, or vice versa. Farmers institutes are very, very active across Canada to support local farms in a lot of policies, especially when it comes to the federal level and the provincial levels. But they're actively wanting to make sure that food security goes ahead. So farmers institutes across Canada are very, very important. A lot of them are very much community based, or they would like to be community based, but definitely try to seek them out and try to work with them. And also try to engage in seed saving. This is something that's very, very important, especially when it comes to Seeds Ed Diversity and a lot of the other seed organizations across Canada. Is seed saving is very, very important, especially within your growing areas in your region. So if you can, by any way, have a little pocket of some property, if you have it, that has a bit of a barrier to it, so our lovely pollinators aren't pollinating all around and cross pollinating. Try to do that, even if that could mean leaving a couple carrots in the ground, in the winter time. Don't pick them, and then they can just reshoot again and actually grow seed from those tops. That's important. But try as much as you can. I'm not going to be here to tell you what kind of seeds. I'm not here for that. I'm trying to kind of educate you and have you adapt to climate change. But open pollinated is always the best way to go. We just want to try to shy away from hybrid varieties, but try to engage in seed saving and contribute to your local CD Saturdays and Sunday events within your region. That would be very, very useful in terms of climate change. And, I just want to send you off by, really wishing you to have a great growing season, especially since we're into year 2 of COVID. Try to get outside and have a great time, no matter what our weather is. Don't let it get you down. That's the one thing you don't want, is just don't let it get you down. You want to be able to be successful, but each time, even if you're a successful grower, you're going to still have some concerns as you kind of go through it all. You think that you got full sun, that variety worked for you great last year, and now it's not. Well, don't get frustrated. Try to figure out what it is. Did your neighbor put another tree in their backyard? Did someone put up some sort of laurel hedge somewhere? Are more cedars come in a different area? That's something that you want to keep in mind, because our seasons aren't always going to be normal. We're already seeing reports of winter weather that would be within the prairies and in Ontario. It gets very cold. That's what they expect, and then all of a sudden it warms up. It gives them hope. It's going to kind of go back and forth like that. That's what we've already seen it. It's happening now, and it will further happen. So it's not going to be what we once remember, but always be thinking ahead in what is happening this year. But as you can, however you can, try to plan ahead. And just kind of keep in mind that prevention and maintenance is key. So never forget about your garden. Very important. You planted it, go back to it, notice things, because we are all kind of in this together. And if we just communicate with each other, we can kind of get through. So whether that's COVID or it's climate change, as long as we adapt, go with it, don't fight it, try to prevent and maintain is going to be key. So thank you for following along. I'm sorry if I was rushed in any kind of way, but I'm going to be leaving some links for further knowledge for all of you in sort of that description part, on YouTube. So then you can all get the links if you would like to do further reading. And I hope that this presentation sort of opened up some of the avenues for you to do a little bit more research. And that could be anywhere when it comes to companion planting is also something that's been done for years, but also does help with prevention and maintenance. And I will leave a link to that in the bottom as well. So have a great growing season, and let me know if you have any questions in regards to this presentation, and have a great growing season. Bye-bye.